Good evening, and thank you for joining us. To those of you around the world for news from a Catholic perspective, I'm Lauren Ashburn. The threat of Islamic extremism was a uniting theme at today's NATO conference in Brussels, despite President Trump's calls on NATO members to pay their fair share for military protection. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the key items on the agenda were the fight against terrorism and the cost of defense. There was an awkward silence when President Trump suggested most NATO countries were freeloaders.
We have to make up for the many years lost. 2% is the bare minimum for confronting today's very real and very vicious threats.
While unveiling a steel beam that crashed at the World Trade Center towers on 9/11, President Trump chastised NATO leaders. He wants to hold leaders accountable for a 6-year-old agreement, which called for member nations to contribute 2% of their GDP to NATO defense spending. Trump says 23 of the 28 member nations are not paying, and it's not fair to the people of the United States.
If all NATO members had spent just 2% of their GDP on defense last year, we would have had another $119 billion for our collective defense.
While some NATO members disagree, a U.S. foreign policy expert echoes the president.
Because it's not hard and fast, very few states have kept to that 2% pledge. But as the threats from both the Middle East and of course, Russia have grown, the need for spending more on defense has become quite evident.
Also during the NATO summit, Trump held several meetings, including one with new French President Emmanuel Macron. He says their talk was friendly and very frank, despite the fact that Trump declined to comment on a key climate change agreement. The two leaders shared an intense handshake, with onlookers noting that their knuckles turned white. The White House says President Trump's presence at this event underscores his commitment to NATO. His next stop is the G7 summit in Italy. Lauren?
Thank you, Mark.